Humans as a population can often lose sight of the fact that we are part of a larger global community, not only sharing the Earth with other fellow humans, but also with a wide variety of other species. Since all species on Earth must share the global ecosystem, humans must be good stewards of the air we breathe, the land we occupy, and water we drink. Otherwise, no species, including ourselves, are going to have good long-term survival prospects. Ecology is a study of organisms' interactions with each other and with the non-living part of their environment. There are 3 levels to the organization of organisms and their interactions with one another to consider. The first is a population, which includes all members of a species who live in a geographical region. Geographical region is open to interpretation. For instance, we could consider the human population in Chicago, in Illinois, in the United States, on the North American continent, or even the entire global human population. The definition of a species are 2 organisms that breed to produce viable offspring. Viable means that the offspring are also able to go on and reproduce themselves to create their own offspring. For example, a donkey and a horse are closely related enough species that they can breed to produce a mule. However, mules are always sterile, meaning that they cannot produce their offspring. Therefore, a donkey and horse are still separate species of organisms. Populations are part of a larger community, which includes all interacting populations of different species that coexist in an area. For example, lions in the African savanna interact with zebras, antelope, certain species of grass, plants, and trees. Communities exist within an ecosystem. An ecosystem includes all communities within an area along with the non-living environment. For instance, if we consider the ecosystem of a rainforest versus a rainforest is warm and receives a lot of rainfall. This is in comparison to a desert, which is also very hot during the day, but receives very little rainfall. Clearly, organisms that are adapted to live in a rainforest ecosystem are not going to be able to survive in a desert, and vice versa. Organisms within a population arrange themselves in space in 3 different ways. This includes clumped, uniform, and random distribution. We will consider each of these spatial arrangements in more detail over the next few slides. In the meantime, realize that the spatial arrangement may vary with time, such as changing during the breeding season. For instance, a male animal that typically lives in solitary on its own must get close enough to a female mate in order to breed to produce offspring during peak breeding season. Clump distribution includes members of populations that live clumped or clustered together in groups. For example, there are elephant herds, wolf packs, bird flocks, fish schools, and human families. Organisms may live in clump distribution for social reasons, to form familial units, or they may cluster around resources such as lakes where they all go to drink water at the same time. Advantages to clump distribution include that there are many individuals to search for food, and at the same time many individuals to keep an eye open for predators. If you have ever heard that there is strength in numbers, this refers to clump distribution. In uniform distribution, individuals in a population maintain constant distances between themselves. This is common among animals that defend territories to protect scarce resources. For example, shorebirds, which are birds that build their nests along the shore of water, are found in evenly spaced nests during the breeding season. Another example are creosote bushes in the desert that release chemicals into the soil to inhibit nearby germination of other plants so that they are not competing for a scarce water source. Random distribution is just that, random. This means that the distance between individuals within a population varies unpredictably. Therefore, the individuals do not form social groups as we saw in clumped or even uniform distribution. Typically, we see this sort of distribution in an area where there are abundant resources available so that territorial spacing to protect scarce resources is not required. An example would be trees and plants in rainforests. Rainforests have plenty of rainfall and plenty of soil nutrients. Therefore, trees and plants can scatter themselves unpredictably because they are never competing for scarce resources. Here we see the three types of spatial arrangement that we just talked about. We start with uniform distribution, in which organisms spread out evenly. For instance, in a group of marching penguins, the penguins maintain equidistance between themselves and other penguins. In random distribution, organisms spread out in an unpredictable pattern. In this case, we see dandelions with no equal spacing between them. You've got some plants that are closer together and some that are further apart, depending on where a seed has taken sprout. In clump distribution, organisms stick very closely together in groups. In this elephant herd, we see that many elephants are actually physically touching other elephants within the herd. Another important aspect to consider regarding populations is how they grow. Sizes of populations can vary in different ways over time. For instance, the size can remain relatively constant. The size can fluctuate in a cyclical pattern or according to a specific cycle, or the size can actually vary sporadically or unpredictably in response to environmental changes. Population size is affected by births, deaths, and migration. A population size remains stable if the number of individuals joining a population equals the number of individuals leaving a population. Individuals join a population through births and immigration, which is migration into the population. Individuals leave a population through deaths and emigration, which is migration out of a population. For instance, the human population in the United States may grow due to births of babies and individuals migrating into the country from other countries. The population within the United States of humans may decrease if the death rate increases and individuals start migrating out of the country to other countries. The population grows if the number of births plus immigrants is greater than the number of deaths plus emigrants. A simplified equation to show this is births minus deaths plus immigrants minus emigrants to give the final change in population size. Per capita growth rate is a measure of how fast a population grows, expressed as a change in population size per individual over time. A simple way to calculate per capita growth rate is to take the birth rate minus the death rate of a population to equal the growth rate. Clearly, if the birth rate is greater than the death rate, the population overall will grow. However, if the number of deaths is greater than the number of births, then the overall population will decrease in size. Let's consider the growth rate of a human population of 10,000 people living within a certain area. If there are 1,500 births per this 10,000 people, this is equal to 0.15 births per person per year. Clearly, an individual cannot give birth to a fraction of a baby, but keep in mind that per capita growth rate measures the change in population size per individual over time. In the same population, if there are 500 deaths per 10,000 people, this is going to equal 0.05 deaths per person per year. This leads to a growth rate of 0.15 for the birth rate minus 0.05 for the death rate, which equals positive 0.1 or a 10% increase per year within this population. We can use the per capita growth rate to calculate the numbers of individuals added to or removed from a population per year, where per capita growth rate is represented by the letter R and population size is represented by the letter N. The population growth in a year is R times N. Using our example from the previous slide, we determined that the population of 10,000 people was growing at a rate of 10% per year. Therefore, in the first year, 1,000 people are added to the population. Now the population has a total of 11,000 people. If the population continues to grow at a rate of 10%, the second year there will be 1,100 people added. If the growth rate of a population continues indefinitely, hopefully you can appreciate that very quickly the population size will increase. As mentioned on the previous slide, if the per capita growth rate of a population remains at a constant positive percentage, the population size will increase quite rapidly. This is known as exponential growth, in which a pattern of continuously accelerating increase in population size causes the population to grow at a rapid rate. Clearly, if the number of births exceeds the number of deaths, a population will grow. This has to do with the population's reproduction patterns. For instance, a population will grow if each individual has more than one surviving offspring during its lifetime. What this means for humans is that if a mating couple has more than 2 offspring total, they are leaving behind more offspring than is needed to replace themselves. Therefore, they are contributing to the overall growth of the human population. The speed of potential growth varies among species depending on several reproductive factors, including the age at which each organism first reproduces, the frequency with which each organism reproduces, the average number of offspring produced each time, the length of an organism's reproductive lifespan, and the death rate of organisms under ideal conditions. Some species produce large numbers of offspring at a rapid rate. An example would be bacteria cells that divide every 20 to 30 minutes, such that the population doubles 3 times each hour. This leads to the fact that the offspring of a single bacterium cell could cover the Earth in a 7-foot deep layer within 48 hours. So why aren't we literally swimming through bacteria on the face of the Earth? Well, if we consider the reproductive factors outlined on the previous slide, while bacteria reproduce at a young age with a high frequency and can generate a large number of offspring from the original parent, luckily they also have a short reproductive lifespan and a high death rate that balances out the overall population numbers. A J-shaped curve is used to represent a fast-growing population, such as this bacteria population, starting with a single individual that doubles every 30 minutes. It only takes 10 hours to generate over 1 million bacteria from the initial starting cell. Some species are relatively long-lived and reproduce slowly. An example would be golden eagles that live about 30 years and produce very few offspring per year. If we consider the reproductive factors outlined a few slides ago, eagles reproduce at an older age with a lower frequency and can only generate a small number of offspring from the original parent. What allows the population to survive over time is that they have a longer reproductive span coupled with a lower death rate. Notice that this is the exact opposite scenario of what we discussed for bacteria, which is a prime example of an extremely fast growing population, as opposed to a slower growing population here. A J-shaped curve can also be used to represent a slower growing population, such as this population of whooping crane birds, starting with a few individuals and taking multiple years to double in size. Notice that it takes 60 years to generate around 180 birds from the few starting individuals. Compare this to bacterial growth, in which over 1 million cells could be generated within only 10 hours. Here we consider the first reproductive factor, which is the age of first reproduction, a little more closely. If organisms in a population begin reproducing at a later age, the population will take much longer to reach a particular size. Consider the whooping crane example on the previous slide, or the example of humans discussed here. Humans don't begin reproducing until their teens or even later. Therefore, a human baby will take several years to start reproducing in order to contribute to the overall population size. The fifth reproductive factor is death rate. A higher death rate slows an overall growth rate of a population. For example, along with the very high birth rates of bacteria, they also have very high death rates, so they don't quickly cover the earth. Overall, these 5 reproductive factors should lead to well-balanced populations that don't grow or die too quickly.